President Trump and Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hold a news conference linking Tylenol use by pregnant women to later autism diagnoses, with the Food and Drug Administration moving to change the labeling on the pain medicine to suggest as much.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, columnist Alicia Finley and editorial board member Kate Batchelder Odell. Fight like hell not to take it, President Trump said Monday at the White House, referring to Tylenol, also known as acetaminophen. In a letter to physicians, FDA Director Marty Makary wrote this, quote, evidence is accumulated suggesting that the use of acetaminophen by pregnant women may be associated with an increased risk of neurological conditions such as autism and ADHD in children. Some studies have described that risk as most pronounced when acetaminophen is taken chronically throughout pregnancy. He went on to say that a causal relationship has not been established. There are contrary studies in the scientific literature. He also cautioned that Tylenol remains the safest over-the-counter alternative in pregnancy for women who have pain and fever. But it's fair to say that much of that nuance was not echoed by the political leadership of the White House. Let's first listen to a clip of President Trump.
So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary. That's for instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol.
And here's Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr.
HHS will act on acetaminophen. The FDA is responding to clinical and laboratory studies that suggest a potential association between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and adverse neurodevelopmental outcomes, including later diagnosis for ADHD and autism. Scientists have proposed biological mechanisms linking prenatal acetaminophen exposure to altered brain development. We have also evaluated the contrary studies that show no association. Today, the FDA will issue a physician's notice about the risk of acetaminophen during pregnancy and begin the process to initiate a safety label change.
Alicia, you've looked at some of these studies. What is the evidence? What's your read of the evidence on this claimed association between Tylenol and the rise in autism diagnoses?
So let's back up to what we know about autism. And what most of the evidence suggests is that it has genetic underpinnings. There are at least 800 genes that have been associated with autism. And it's estimated that genes cause about 80% of the case, and some mix of genes. In some cases, there may actually only be one gene that causes autism. And there's actually gene therapies in the works to try to treat that. But in most cases, it's a mix of genes, and that could be potentially affected also by in utero exposures. And what that means is what a baby is exposed to or in the womb. And that isn't just referring to environmental factors, as in chemicals or what a mother ingests. It could also refer to maternal illnesses and fevers, and then an inflammatory environment. Now, several years ago, the trial lawyers, many of them, embarked on a mass tort against Johnson & Johnson's Tylenol. It's now Johnson & Johnson has since spin off a separate arm for its consumer division called now Kenvue. But these trial lawyers alleged that Tylenol causes autism and ADHD. Now, they tapped these plaintiff experts, or what are known as plaintiff experts, to review all the evidence. And the problem is there really wasn't much evidence. If you look at all the studies, they're mostly animal studies. The studies in humans were largely observational. You can't really do a randomized control trial, so they'd have to be observational. But the problem is there are a lot of what are known as confounding factors, things that could influence two things. So, for instance, in this case, it could be the fact that women who have certain genes that make them more likely to have neurologic pain, experience migraines, could also be more likely, those genes could also predispose the child to autism. They actually have found some evidence for that across multiple countries. Now, it also could be the fact that women who experience illnesses or fevers during pregnancy, that those fevers and illnesses actually increase the odds of the child having autism. They've actually found that fevers, particularly in the second trimester, are independently associated with a risk of autism. Now, there have actually been some studies that have shown that actually taking Tylenol can reduce the risk of autism. Now, the Trump administration doesn't mention those, but the suspicion is that's probably because Tylenol does reduce the fevers, and there is some kind of independent association between fever and autism. But on the whole, the evidence and the studies are pretty mixed. The best studies have been done on parents and sibling pairs to try to control for the genetic confounding, and those have actually found no link. Now, the plaintiff experts in the lawsuit that was brought against Kenvue disregarded those studies. They kind of cherry-picked the ones that they liked that showed that what they wanted to show, to claim that there was a causal link. The judge disagreed with that, said that this evidence is too inconsistent, it's unreliable, and tossed the case. So that brings us to today, where they are now appealing that their lawsuit, or appealing to the Second Circuit to reinstate it, basically. And that case goes to the Second Circuit in another month or so.
On the point about the risks of fevers and other illnesses during pregnancy, that's something touched on by the statement by the head of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Here's part of what he says. In more than 2 decades of research on the use of acetaminophen in pregnancy, not a single reputable study has successfully concluded that the use of acetaminophen in any trimester of pregnancy causes neurodevelopmental disorders in children. He went on to say that the conditions for which people use Tylenol during pregnancy are far more dangerous than any theoretical risks and can create severe morbidity and mortality for the pregnant person and the fetus. So his suggestion here is that this messaging by the Trump administration is irresponsible, he says, and confusing to pregnant women, essentially. There's a Nature write-up, if people want to go find that goes more into some of the differences between these studies and the confounding factors that Alicia is talking about. Quotes one autism psychologist saying, "We do not think that taking acetaminophen is in any way contributing to actually causing autism." Some of these studies that are more detailed and in-depth, as Alicia says, look at siblings, one of whom was exposed to Tylenol during pregnancy and one of whom was not. And this Nature write-up says that generally finds no difference, and that would support the idea that Tylenol is not what is causing autism or these other disorders. Kate, it just goes to the point of maybe this is an area of more research. Maybe the government wants to do more research on that. I would find that fine. What I find strange is the certitude with which the president of the United States is coming out in a national news conference and making these kinds of statements. Tylenol is bad.
To be clear, I think you're right that more public focus on autism and its causes is welcome. And I think there actually has been a lot of scientific interest in the question of why autism cases are on the rise. One clear factor in that is that it's being diagnosed more frequently, that the criteria for it has expanded over the past several decades. And that's not a scientific failure, because kids who are diagnosed earlier can get more services that help them. And to Alicia's description, the causes are very complex and may involve an interplay of genes and environment. And I'm open to evidence that Tylenol and its long-term consequences aren't fully understood. But here, what the government has done is presented mixed evidence and not attempted to disentangle, for instance, having a high fever during pregnancy versus taking the Tylenol. And we don't conduct clinical trials on pregnant women for very obvious reasons, and that will always be a limitation on our knowledge. But why I think this matters at a very high level, and why this is so regrettable, is because the Trump team campaigned, a core issue of their campaign was that scientific arms of government had lost the public's trust and confidence. And COVID was the prime example of that health regulators were too quick to tout lockdowns. They were slow to acknowledge some side effects in the vaccines. I think this was a powerful argument with a lot of the public. And I bring that up because my concern is that the Tylenol affair is just another circle around the drain for government's scientific apparatus. I think what the public wanted from government was more humility and dispassionate presentation of the data and its limits. The best of these agencies and the doctors' groups is when they help Americans make individual decisions by laying out the known costs and benefits. And so here we just have a really broad brush painted on a ubiquitous over-the-counter drug. That I think is just another sad milestone in our scientific lack of scientific trust.
On that point, Alicia, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the litigation and particularly RFK Jr.'s background as a trial lawyer, essentially motivating some of this. I also wonder how much of it is driven by the fact that talk is cheap, and it is easy to go out on the campaign trail or on the early days of the administration and say the other party is totally corrupt, and when we get in power, we are going to get to the bottom of autism, which RFK Jr. has done. He said that we are going to figure this out. We're going to have a lot more information to you by September. Well, here we are. Now it's September, and so it seems like, maybe that's part of the explanation here is he felt the need to say something, and Tylenol was the thing that they could find that maybe they could hang a news conference on.
I guess I'm a little more cynical than that. They leaked this about a month ago, right after this study in a journal, and it was a pay-to-play, what is known as a pay-to-play journal, in which scientists paid to get their study published. And the study was by 3 of the plaintiff experts. And day after the study was published, they submitted it to the Second Circuit that's scheduled to hear the appeal. And the appeal was, by the way, supposed to start or the case in 2 weeks. It was actually just rescheduled for November. But this whole conference came 2 weeks before that appeal. And now, again, this is a who's who of law firms: Beasley Allen, the Lanier law firm, and several others that have been in cahoots with RFK on other mass torts, including the Roundup weed killer, and lawsuits against Merck's HPV vaccine. Now, the other Occam's razor, in my view, was a statement from Ashley Keller, the lead litigator, actually, as it happens to be a Republican, who said last week that if the HHS does the quote-unquote right thing, we're going to deliver this evidence to the Second Circuit. Which suggests that there was some kind of door or backroom communications going on between the trial lawyers and HHS about what they plan to present. The other important point is that Dr. McCary has said that we're planning to change the label on Tylenol to add this new warning label. The reason why that is significant is because the trial lawyers have been pushing that in order to say that well, this was actually the company, the manufacturer, didn't adequately warn. They knew they knew when they had this evidence, and they should have added this to the warning label. But the FDA, since 2015, has said, well, we don't see any clear causal evidence to add this to the warning label, and we're not going to do this because, for the reasons Kate laid out, it's going to create a scare and it could actually do more harm. And so the FDA has declined to do so. But now the FDA is essentially going along with the trial lawyers, and now with this new warning on the label. And in my view, it's just a really bad look for the Trump administration and public health institutions. I think, to both of your points, after the pandemic, public health experts and institutions lost a lot of trust. And I think this is just going to sow more distrust and undermine confidence in the credibilities of the experts and the people, the scientists in government.
The other thing that strikes me here is that this effort on Tylenol seems to fit with RFK Jr.'s broader, I would say mostly left, but also just populist worldview, that if there's a problem out in the world, it is someone's fault. And usually that is some big company, it is big food, it is big pharma. Someone is doing this to the American people, and we need to hold them accountable. And that's not always the register in which he speaks, but it often is, I find. I mean, take his stuff on the obesity crisis and getting to the bottom of the obesity crisis. I mean, honestly, I'm not surprised that we have an obesity problem in this country. Modern world, for most people, a lot of people, is driving from point A to point B and then sitting at a desk in an office looking at a computer for a big chunk of the day, and then driving back from point B to point A and maybe grabbing some fast food on the way to the kids' sports practice and staying up too late watching football or Netflix and not getting enough sleep. And to be clear, I'm not trying to say any of that in a judgmental way. As the old joke goes, I resemble that remark. But it seems like RFK Jr. is selling a message that it's not that. It's not any of that. It's not any broader social problems. It's the fact that we are all being poisoned effectively by big food companies, ultra-processed food. And Kate, it seems like this is in keeping with that message, selling a story that the rise in autism is not any of these complicated genetic factors or broader diagnostic criteria. The ability, the wealth that we have now to care more deeply about these kinds of social issues that young children are having in a way that was not possible decades and decades ago, and to say that it is really big pharma's fault.
I think you're right to connect this episode to RFK's larger agenda. And I admit that I share some of Alicia's cynicism, but I think RFK Jr., as a political figure, I think he helped Trump with suburban women during the campaign who are concerned about what their children are eating, who are concerned about ultra-processed food, who are concerned about plastics in our environment, any number of things. And so I think the focus on chronic diseases is welcome, but I also think that what RFK has done is basically become an apex predator on maternal anxiety and fear for children. He has basically constructed a worldview that tells suburban women like me to live in fear of seed oils and plastic crock-pot liners, and raising the level of fear around all sorts of products in American life that has led to ransacking your house for all these toxins based on a pretty thin thread of evidence. And so it is just unfortunate to put Tylenol in the mix of that, and to also, from my own personal experience, I mean, pregnancy is just such an intense and vulnerable experience. Any woman is thinking about what's best for her developing child and has to weigh things like, I have a fever, or I have a pre-existing health condition where I need to take some medicine, or the effects may not be entirely known. So again, I guess this gets back to my earlier point that these agencies and the scientific apparatus of government is supposed to help Americans with their doctors make informed choices in a world that's just full of enormous risks. and try to weigh what the best decision is at any right point. So my fear here is that there's this predatory element on women who fear for their children and want what's best for them. And this is just a prime example of taking advantage of that.
But this worldview that we're talking about, I mean, it's one thing for people to be skeptical and disregard what RFK Jr. and the president are saying in this press conference, whatever new language is going to be added to Tylenol labels by the FDA. But Alicia, it also has deeper effects on the way that these agencies are run. And you've looked at another of these cases of the FDA looking more skeptically than it maybe would have under previous Republican administration at what some oncologists are calling a breakthrough melanoma drug. And the Journal's editorial on this point says that this is a scandal that will cost many lives. What is the story here?
Okay, so this goes back. This is a melanoma kind of vaccine or shot, and it's a form of an immunotherapy. Now, there are many patients who do not benefit from existing immune or checkpoint therapies. And those therapies on the market today have been tremendously helpful. They've really driven down mortality rates and increased survival for melanoma, which used to be a terminal disease in most cases. But there are some patients who do not respond to those treatments. Now, this melanoma, this kind of shot, was found, let me back up. This melanoma shot by a biotech company called Replimune was found to basically shrink tumors in nearly all patients, about 94% of patients. 1/3 of the patients went into what it was, defined as remission, and that lasted on average 3 years. And then 1/6 during the trial period of the trial were completely cured. Now, these are unprecedented results, and melanoma doctors around the world have said as much. For a disease that is terminal, for at least 1/6 of them to be completely cured and 1/3 to go into remission, long-term remission at least, that's a huge breakthrough. No, of course, it doesn't help everyone, but that you can't expect that. Now, the FDA in July said, well, we don't think that's good enough. We don't like how you designed your trial. We think it wasn't quote unquote adequately controlled, which suggested they wanted to force the company to run a placebo group, which really makes no sense. Placebo groups are usually not run in these kinds of trials where you have a terminal disease, and it's kind of unethical to give a patients a drug, which would be the placebo, that they've already failed under or haven't responded to in the past. This all appeared to be a pretext for Vinay Prasad, who's the head of the FDA Biologics Division and Chief Medical Officer, to reject the drug because he thinks too many of these cancer treatments in particular, and note that he is an oncologist, have been approved and they're too pricey and they only help some patients and they don't really help them. Overall, they're not cures. In other words, they don't help enough patients, and the healthcare industry is spending too much helping people live longer without necessarily curing them. In my view, Vinay Prasad was trying to send a signal to the industry that we're going to be approving fewer and fewer cancer drugs. You better do long, bigger studies to ensure that without any kind of doubt that these drugs are effective, and we want out of the ballpark results. This elicited some protests from melanoma patients and their doctors saying, hey, we want this drug. We want it approved. The company sought what's called a type A meeting with the FDA, I guess earlier this month, to go over the results and ask, well, what else can we do? What other kinds of data would you like for us to, get this approved? And it came away from that meeting with a conclusion that basically there's nothing we can do right now. We're going to have to run another large trial, which could take years. I mean, who knows if the company would even survive? And if the company survives, what happens to this drug that helps patients? So there's actually quite an outcry among oncologists who've been treating these patients. And some of the patients are, other melanoma patients who won't have this accessible. And I think what's important to underline is the direction that the FDA is headed under Vinay Prasad is away from the Donald Trump's, signature right to try. And really what right to try means that, the FDA should accelerate and increase flexibility for diseases, for rare diseases and terminal ones that have no other treatments. And this Revlimid, I think, is a case example of that kind of mindset that the FDA should be trying to move this and make it accessible to as many patients as possible. But in this case, it seems to be doing the opposite. And I think the worry much more broadly in the biotech industry is that this signals that the FDA really is going to be much more rigid in their reviews and it will be approving far fewer novel treatments and requiring much more expensive, bigger, longer studies that may not be even economic to run.
But Kate, it seems to me that maybe this is another place where RFK Jr. is working at cross purposes to President Trump's own worldview. I seem to remember him being very proud and proclaiming right to try as a principle that the Republican Party stood behind. And I get that during the 2024 campaign, they made kind of a bargain. RFK Jr. dropped out of the race and threw his support behind President Trump and has gotten himself a pretty good job here. But I do start to wonder if he starts doing things at these agencies that are contrary to President Trump's own views, how long his welcome might last.
Well, I mean, to your point about, we're talking about the Tylenol episode too, and I think there's a connection here to that story. I mean, we are holding up drugs that are urgently needed that oncologists are banging down the door for, saying my advanced melanoma patients are out of options and we need to get this to market. We need to tell companies to keep investing in this space. We need to learn from it in real world patient experience. And the FDA is saying, well, we need to hold on and really be sure about all of the evidence. Meanwhile, we're taking shots at over-the-counter drugs based on associations that we're not really sure about. And so I think, again, getting if their calling card was gold standard science, that is a real problem. And again, this is consistent with Trump's agenda that drugs should be moved to market faster because that's what allows companies to learn and to grow. I mean, I think especially in the gene therapy space, we're in an inflection point where either these treatments are going to come to market and we're going to get better and better ones, or we're going to see the field kind of clear out of investment. I think that would be unfortunate. I mean, last quick point is just to throw this in there, I guess, on the Tylenol point, I think one of the things I'm can't stop dwelling on, in addition to Alicia's points about the pecuniary motives of the plaintiffs bar, is just, one policy priority that I think the Trump administration has been really right to care about is why Americans aren't having more kids. And this is an enormous topic. I promise not to go into too much detail, but I think they're right to worry about that as the direction of the country. And yet we now have this big 2-day affair where we're telling people to be very nervous about taking any Tylenol while they're pregnant. And there's a real disconnect there. And so I think that's another example of where some of Trump's top line priorities are getting sort of co-opted by RFK and his pet projects in ways that I don't think is helpful for Trump. And I could think, he could eventually run out of patience for it.
Thank you, Kate and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.